Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Big Issues series. Today in our Big Issues series here at Sidcup Baptist Church Youth, we're going to be looking at politics. And a thing I often get into arguments with people about is that God doesn't care about politics. He doesn't care which way we vote. He doesn't care what we do with our lives. He just cares that we're good people and all that kind of stuff. And I've always really struggled with that because, well, there are two main reasons. One, because I come from an extremely political family. Some of my profound and shaping memories as a teenager were going on protests and talking about politics quite a lot, being encouraged to research it in all sorts of ways. And I remember having a conversation with my mum once and just talking about some of the stuff that was going on at school and stuff like that. And I think I was in year 7 when we had this conversation, just to give it some clarity. So I was very far away from voting and I was in quite a rough school. And my mum said to me, "Martha, if you get pregnant, we'll look after you. If you become a drug addict, we'll look after you. You'll always have a place here. But if you vote Conservative, Martha, you can't live here anymore." And that was my first shaping experience of politics. I also remember being really young and going on the Make Poverty History March with my mum, where we stayed up, I think, all night. We didn't get back until very late, and we basically were protesting the fact that so many people were poor in the world. And so my life has been really shaped by politics, and that's one reason why I really struggle for it to be such a small thing to God. But the second thing is that it goes against everything I read in the Bible. I really think God cares about which way we vote, because which way we vote affects lots of other things. It affects whether people who are the poorest in our society get looked after well. It affects how immigrants are treated. It affects how the elderly are looked after. It affects all sorts of things. And there are so many verses I could call upon right now to back up my point, as it were. But my favourite one can be found in Isaiah 1. And Isaiah 1:17 says this: "Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless and plead the case of the widow." Now, what does that mean? Well, in ancient Israeli society, though, if you were a widow or didn't have a father, you didn't have anybody to represent you, didn't have any income most probably, and you were basically left alone. So when he's saying about seeking justice and defending the cause of the oppressed, what he's saying is that you should look out for those who can't look out for themselves. And so often in politics, it's a very small amount of people making a decision for lots and lots of people. Even when we come to voting, hardly any of the population really vote. And this is another thing that irks me quite a lot. But the thing that I've come to realise, and the thing that I think really is shown in the life of Jesus, is that as Christians, we are called to look after the poor. We are called to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to give shelter to the homeless, to heal the sick. And that has got huge implications on how we vote. And not just that, but if you're obviously of an age right now where you can't vote, you can't put your bit of paper in that ballot box on voting day, but you can do other things. You can sign petitions, you can go on protests, you can do all sorts of things to show that you care about what God cares about. It's not really something that God cares about massively, I think, but before I could vote, there was an election that really annoyed me, and a few months after the election, they were going to vote to increase student tuition fees. And this really riled me as someone who wasn't from a very well-off background, who lived in a really deprived area. I knew that a lot of my friends weren't going to be able to go to university when the tuition fees were risen, and there was less help out there for them. And so I organised a mass walkout of sixth form. And so me and a lot of other people, like probably about 100 people, walked out of our sixth form, and we went to protest up London. And that was me trying to make a stand. I couldn't vote, I couldn't do anything, but I knew what I felt was wrong was happening, and so I had to change something. And I think that's one of the things that I would really say about God is that God is a God of action. He is not a dormant God. He is not a God that just sits and watches the world go by. He is a God of action. And so whatever our age, whether we are able to vote or not, we are still called to speak up for the oppressed, the marginalised and the widows. And we can do that in lots of ways. Like I said, you can go on protests, you can write letters to your MPs, you can write letters to the Prime Minister, you can write letters to different secretaries of state that are in charge of different things. If you find out something that irks you and you want to see change about it, you'll find that actually, because you're younger, because you can't vote, a lot of MPs are willing to give you more time because you're a young person. And so use this time in your life where you have a lot more time in lockdown, you have a lot of time to do stuff, to actually evoke some change in the world. Do some research, find out how different things are being treated in your area, and write to your council, write to your MP. And it's really easy to find out who those people are. You just have to Google like the MP for Sidcup or the MP for Dartford or Bexley or whatever it is. Do things to evoke change, and also let people know that you care about what's going on. Recently, in the last few years, a lot of things about race have really come to the forefront in British and American politics, and I really struggled as a white person to be able to do anything about those because I didn't know where to start. And basically what I started doing was just saying I agree with certain people who were speaking up against it. I didn't know how to articulate my voice very well, I didn't know how to talk about these things, but I just knew that I agreed with certain people, and so I said it. And that is giving my voice to their voice. It's saying that I want to amplify what they're saying. I don't necessarily know as much as they know about it. I don't feel it as keenly as they feel it. But I want to add my voice to theirs. And that's what seeking justice and standing up for the oppressed is like. It's adding your voice to it to make the shout louder. It's putting your foot down and saying, no, I think this is wrong. It's writing to those in power and holding those people in power to accountability. If you start to really like somebody because of the promises that they're making in their election campaign and they don't hold true to that, then let them know that you're annoyed about it. Politics is a complicated thing, and I've always been a left-leaning voter myself, and so I really struggle to stay passive when it comes to politics, because I don't think God does. I think God is not a passive God. I think he is very, very clear that he wants to look after the lowest in our society. And so when it comes to politics, that's what we should be looking at and doing.